To introduce myself, I'm Susie Goldenkrantz. I'm a member of our CBI Racial Justice Committee. Really excited for our program this afternoon and for everybody who has made it. We're going to have folks in person. Got a dozen people still walking in here in the room at the chapel. We have folks online who are still joining from all over the state. And we are so thrilled that you took time out of your Sunday, your Mother's Day, just to be here with us. One quick note before we do introductions, that sound is that of the air conditioner. So we are going to keep it on so that we all stay cool. But it will be like that probably for the time that we're here. So with that, I want to introduce our panelists and then go through our program for the afternoon. Sitting next to me is Chris Lodgson from what is the name of the organization?
Coalition for a Just and Equitable California.
Thank you. I never remember it. And he's going to be sharing the second half a little bit about what's going on today within our legislative work within the state, all about the reparations task force that had taken place, the work that we have in some handouts here, but we'll be talking about that. And we have Yolanda Savage-Navra from Union for Reform Judaism, who is joining us from the East Coast. And she's going to provide us with an introduction on why this matters to us from the Jewish perspective. So the URJ has long-standing sort of work around reparations, and we're really excited to get some of that Jewish context. We also have a Marie from Bend the Arc, California, who is here. Bend the Arc is a non-URJ, but a sort of affiliated partner that does Jewish organizing for social justice issues across the country. So Marie is here from the California chapter, which will be working on reparations work. And I believe that is everyone. Judy, anyone else that I missed from introductions?
Nope. I think Rabbi Pessner will introduce himself in his video.
Hold on, Judy, turning up the audio.
All Thanks, right. Susie. I think Rabbi Jonah Dov Pesner will introduce himself in his video.
Perfect. All right. So with that, we're going to start with an introduction from, as Judy just said, Rabbi Jonah Dov Pesner, who's the head of the Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism. He's going to give us a little bit of a blessing for today's event. We're then going to dive and let Yolanda share a little bit more about what we are doing, how this matters from a Jewish perspective. We'll talk a little bit about reparations framework and do a little bit of discussion amongst ourselves and in Zoom rooms. And then Chris is going to spend some time sharing about what is going on here in California. So please, we'll have lots of time for questions throughout the program. Raise your hand or raise your hand on Zoom and we'll be able to share. But with that, I think we can turn it over and send it to Ryan to share Jonah's introduction.
Shalom to my congregation, B'nai Israel of Sacramento family. I'm Rabbi Jonah Pesner, the director of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, the largest and most diverse denomination in Jewish life. So thrilled to be here with you, and I want to especially thank Susie Goldenkrantz for inviting me to be part of this important conversation about reparations for the descendants of enslaved African people in the United States and in California in particularly. Susie, I have to invoke the name of your amazing beloved mother of blessed memory, Kathy Goldenkrantz, with whom I did this work starting more than 20 years ago as we were leaning into social justice, civil rights, and racial equity and organizing our congregations to do what they can for justice. And so you're carrying on that torch and also the footsteps of your wonderful father, Andrew, a member of our Commission on Social Action, and you yourself, a member of our North American Board of the Union for Reform Judaism. So thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you also to amazing Rabbi Mona Alfie and to the great Jennifer Kaufman, the immediate past chair of the board of the Union for Reform Judaism. It's so important that you are having this conversation that you've been having now for more than a year about reparations. And I really appreciate that you asked along the way the agitational question: has our nation been built on a stolen beam? Because that puts your congregation, B'nai Israel, right in line with hundreds, if not thousands of years of Jewish tradition, asking what teshuvah, what repentance, really looks like. There is an argument in the Talmud about what happens when one discovers that one's house has been built with a stolen beam. And one opinion, Shammai's opinion, is that the whole house should be torn down. Where Hillel, the more reasonable voice, says, we don't tear down the house, but we must pay reparations. We must compensate the person whose beam was stolen and do repair work. Maimonides goes on to suggest that tshuva, that repentance, is only possible when financial compensation is made to all those who are the victims of crime. So thank you to the CBI family for really engaging in that conversation. You are part of our movement's historic commitment to reparations. In 2019, we passed our resolution, which had with overwhelming support from across our movement, that had 3 key pillars. One was demanding that the federal government do its part to pass H.R. 40, and which would cause the federal government to study what the reparations for the descendants of enslaved Africans would actually look like. We also asked our movement to recommit to racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, to make sure that we were holding our own institutions accountable to our own racial justice commitments. And finally, we asked our individual congregations to do their part to engage in the work of reparations. And you, CBI, have been doing just that. So I'm proud that from 2019 until today, you are part of this important commitment. But I also want to lift up, our commitment did not start with the passing of a resolution in 2019. As early as 1950, your Reformed Jewish movement committed to the civil rights movement, culminating some years later in the founding of the Religious Action Center of Reformed Judaism, which I'm honored to lead, that played host to the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights. Our offices in Washington, where Dr. King used to meet and debate and discuss, which is why significant portions of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 were drafted in our conference room. So again, you follow in the footsteps of the great work of this movement and the civil rights icons that came before. I would argue, in fact, that our commitment to reparations and racial justice didn't begin in 2019. It didn't begin in 1950. It began with the very beginning of our faith tradition, the very book of Genesis, our beginning of our scripture, in which we are told that God created the world and God created humanity, B'Tselem Elohim. God created the first human in God's own image. In fact, the rabbis point out that we humans are all the descendant of one ancestor, and that one ancestor was the origin of our creation, to prove that no one person, no one human could say about another human, my ancestors were greater than your ancestors, because we all come from the same source. In fact, the rabbinic midrashic teaching goes on to say that that first human that was created by God, the material of which was taken by God from all the 4 corners of the earth, taken from yellow clay, white sand, black loam, and red soil, so that the first human was made up of all of the beauty of God's creation. So, Congregation B'nai Israel, thank you for the great work that you're doing. Thank you for the conversations you're going to have today. Thank you for leaning into California and the unique role that you can play in your great state in leading the rest of our country in this investigation of reparations. And you are about to hear from my incredible colleague, Yolanda Savage Narva, who is the incredible Vice President of Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for our Reformed Jewish movement. And I leave you in very good hands. Thank you again, Susie Goldenkrantz. Thank you to the Congregation B'nai Israel family, and may you go from strength to strength.
Well, thank you, Rabbi Jonah. Slightly embarrassed. Now you all know all about my family. But before we actually pass it to Yolanda, I would love to have Marie from Bend the Ark do a quick introduction for those who are not necessarily members of our community here in Sacramento. And then we will pass it to Yolanda.
Thank you, Susie. I just wanted to say, give a shout out to all my fellow ARC benders who are here. We're really excited to be co-sponsoring this meeting. My name is Marie Matsone, and I'm a core volunteer with Bend the Ark, a Jewish Partnership for Justice. it's been the Art California, I should say. And I wanted to explain that one of our chief missions is to dismantle white supremacy and support Black liberation. And to that end, this year we have chosen to advocate for reparations, recognizing that this will be a long-term project, likely to span several years. And we are beginning this work by educating ourselves. We are also reading selected chapters of the Reparation Task Force report and having weekly generative discussions about the solutions to the long-standing harm suffered by African American community, particularly the descendants of slaves. And so today is part of that process for us, and we're happy to join with CBI's Racial Justice Committee to deepen that conversation. And today we'll review together the case for reparations in California and the Jewish values that compel our support. We look forward to the task force findings and recommendations and the ways that we can continue to learn and advocate in the coming months. Thank you for having us here. And I'll pass it to Susie.
Thank you. And thank you all so much for joining us. We're going to pass it over to Yolanda now to provide us a Jewish grounding, an introduction to why this matters to us as a broader Jewish community. And then have a little bit of time for question and answer for her on Jewish text and why this matters from that sense before we go a little bit further.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for inviting me. Chris, Judy, Marie, Susie, and others for working together to bring this to life. It's truly exciting, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the state of California will do to model the way for the rest of our country. So thank you so much. So I'm Yolanda Savage Narva. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm sitting on the tribal ancestral land of the Pamunkey and Piscataway tribes here in Washington, D.C. I believe in Sacramento, where Congregation B'nai Israel, Sacramento is located. You're on Patwin and Neeson land. For those who have visual impairments, I am a Black woman with braids. I'm wearing a black jacket and a gray shirt and green rimmed glasses. And I'm the Vice President of Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion and Communities of Belonging for the URJ. And it's really a pleasure and an honor to be here with you on this special day in 2024. I want to acknowledge that today is Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers out there, to the mothers, to the children who will lead, create, innovate, and take care of this world when we all have moved on to our spiritual beings. God bless their descendants and their descendants, contributing to the existence of humankind all over the world. To the mothers of our sacred text, those of you who are nurturing and bringing life to the guidance of our ancestors to help all of us to navigate the world around us, giving us resiliency and the strength to tap into holy boldness that we will need to elevate those teachings and what we model to the world. And thank you to the mothers who are the keepers of our land, those of you who are helping us pause, honor, and preserve Turtle Island, also known as the United States, and the rest of the planet to ensure that we all have a place to live and future generations can do the same. Tonight, we will also count the 20th day of the Omer. As many of you know, this is the time between Passover and Shavuot. We know that Passover is the major Jewish holiday that commemorates the Jewish people's liberation from being enslaved in Egypt. And Shavuot is the holiday 50 days after Passover that commemorates when the Israelite liberation from Egypt culminates with the giving of the Torah. I believe that the counting in between Passover and Shavuot can remind all of us of the evolution from a mindset of being enslaved to one that is on a path of liberation. Don't we want that for all of God's children? Don't we want all of God's children to have the opportunity to walk that same path? The individual you, the collective we have the power within us to make that happen for everyone. A few years ago, Congregation Beth Hatikvah is a Reconstructionist synagogue in New Jersey, created the Counting the Omer Project Against Racism. So each week they had a theme like education or healthcare, and then each day of that week, they would focus on some sort of meditation or quote or reading that would further focus that specific theme. And then on Shabbat, they would have a reflection about the theme of the week together online. It's really quite powerful. Although it was done a few years ago during the pandemic, I encourage you to check it out. So I was so inspired by it that I actually took some inspiration from that process to help me frame today's talk. So what does today, the 20th day of counting the Omer, have the opportunity to teach each one of us about how we tap into our inner selves to change the world from the inside out? As we lean on our 2,000-year tradition of sacred text and wisdom to guide us on a path of resiliency, courage, and compassion that will help us make the world a better place, what are those specific takeaways that we can use to anchor us? So before we start, we do have to bless the Omer count, and I can do that really quickly. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvoto v'tzivanu al sefarat haomer, which means, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us concerning the counting of the Omer. That's the actual text. I don't like to do the gendered piece, but that's what it says. So on this 20th day of counting the Omer, I want us to ask ourselves a series of questions. The first question: what are our Jewish values and how do they undergird who we are as Jews, especially in the world that we live in today? And then the second question: what do our sacred texts tell us about repair and repentance? So let's start with the first question. What are our Jewish values and how do they undergird who we are in Jews in the world? As Jews, we know what being the other means. We know what it feels like to be discriminated against and hated simply because we are Jews. We know what that feels like. And because of that, historically, we have lived by a set of values that remind us of who we are and how we must do all within our power as Jews to help create the world that we want to see, one that brings true equity, justice, and liberation to all. The first value is belonging. So if we lean into belonging, belonging means more than just welcoming people into our community. It means that a person feels a sense of value and meaning, and they can be their true, authentic whole selves. In order for people to do that, they have to feel like they've been liberated and they have an opportunity to be who they fully are. If we lean into this value around evolving, the question we ask ourselves is, how do we continue to grow into the ancestor that we want to be as the world is changing around us, demanding more and more from us? It takes tapping into the values and skills of evolving, recognizing that there are multiple truths and not allowing our pain and discomfort to cause us to respond with what I call a trauma response, which prevents us from helping others. Let's lean into this value of learning and this idea that we have to learn, unlearn, and relearn. This is definitely a Jewish value for us that we hold near and dear. There are things that we have been taught that are just plain false. How do we open our hearts and our minds to learning about the real history of what happened in this country and how it has impacted both people of color and all of us? And the fact that nothing has really happened to right this wrong and that it cannot be corrected until we look at truth and reconciliation and reparatory justice. How do we lean into the value of compassion, seeing people through B'Tselem Elohim, through the image of God? Pain is pain and trauma is trauma. And how do we lean into the value of shared humanity, that we are all in this together? Your pain is my pain. Your joy is my joy. The final value that I want to highlight today is the value of holy boldness, Azut de Kadosha. This is a value for me that has been at the top of my list that helps me to navigate the challenging world that we're in. It helps me to say the thing, do the thing that I wouldn't ordinarily do, and that maybe no one else would do as well. So I'm saying that I step up with holy boldness and do what I need to do for shared humanity, and seeing myself as a vessel for peace, justice, equity, and liberation for all people. Because, as Jonah Pesner so eloquently stated in the Talmud, we learn that all people are descendants from a single person, so that no person can say that my ancestor is greater than yours. God created humanity from the four corners of the earth: yellow clay and white sand, black loam and red soil. Therefore, the earth can declare to no part of humanity that it does not belong here, that this soil is not their rightful home. As a Black woman who works for freedom, justice, and fairness, and the liberation for all people, the overwhelming need for truth and reconciliation, for reparations, for reparatory justice is not something we have the luxury to continue to wait on. The ongoing wounds of enslavement and more than 4 centuries of entrenched racial oppression and dehumanization and devaluing of the Black body continues to impact every part of American society, from lynchings to Jim Crow, restricted access to the ballot box, a biased criminal justice system, an education system that is unjust and unfair, and redlining are just some examples of how racial inequity continues to be the very pillar and structures of the American system. As a Jewish woman, I am very connected to the Jewish text, which is clear on the importance of restitution for wrongs committed. Maimonides linked the payment of damages to the concept called teshuvah, the Jewish framework for repentance, noting that financial commitment must be accompanied by atonement. So I do want to talk about so it's interesting in the research that I've done, I've seen the 4 levels of repentance. And I found something earlier from Rabbi Paul Kipnis. I'm sure a lot of people on this screen know who that is. He is the senior rabbi at Congregation Or Ani in Calabasas, California, argues that there are 6 steps to teshuvah, the teshuvah process. And I want to unpack those with you. So the first one is this idea of regret. No wrongdoing can be transformed until we first recognize the error of our ways. A private, deeply personal step. Regret implies that we truly feel remorse for what we have done. So one cannot begin to make teshuvah by apologizing for an action if you do not really believe you were wrong in the first place. Such repentance, undertaken without a sense of regret, does not lead to true healing for the perpetrator or the person who received the harm. Guilt gives that sense of shame about our actions, and it is similarly connected to regret. Good if it propels us forward on the path toward change, but we can't be stuck in guilt. We have to move. So in our striving for growth, we must first see that our mistakes in life have resulted in the loss of something that we deem dear and important. An example that I've been thinking about to really frame this is this idea in public health and healthcare called years of potential life loss. We don't know what could have been because there was so much that was lost along the way. And when we stop to really think about the regret of that, that helps us to understand that it's okay to feel that way, that it propels us forward into action. We just can't allow it to stagnate our growth and our movement. The second piece of teshuvah is to renounce. To renounce our wrongdoings requires honest personal evaluation. I sometimes call this taking the mirror out and looking in the mirror. We look into our hearts and our souls and admit to ourselves that our actions were wrong. No excuses, no rationalizations. we cease to see the action as a necessary consequence of our personality, and we distance ourselves emotionally and intellectually from the deed. Renouncing a sin does not mean that we deny that it happened or that we deny doing it. Rather, renunciation means that we reject any sense that we needed to act as we did. Additionally, I think it allows us to really be resilient. In the case of supporting reparatory justice for other people, it gives us an opportunity to address our own trauma and pain by doing what we can to help alleviate someone else's trauma. Barbara Smith, who started the Combahee River Collective, a Black feminist movement in the Boston area that was active between 1974 and 1980, said, "Until Black women are free, none of us will be free. When we strive to free and foster liberation for the least among us, that's when we are all liberated and free." The third part of Teshuvah is to confess. Confession acknowledges that saying something out loud, actually putting it out there to others, makes it real. Speaking about our mistakes forces us to confront the consequences of our actions, even as we come to terms with why performing them was so seductive. There are two levels to a confession: confessing to the victim, and then confessing to those who know the victim or who know about the wrongdoing. Confessing our wrongdoings begins with confessing to those we most directly wronged, openly, honestly, and without holding back. We admit our wrongdoing, describe our regret, renounce our actions, apologize, and then steel ourselves for the onslaught of emotion to come. Only after this does the sinner then confess to other people, but you want to make sure that you're making amends with the person that was harmed. Jewish tradition declares that forgiveness only can be bestowed by the one who was wronged. As such, true repentance ensures that the one that's wronged hears the confession first. You can do it with other people, but the person that's wronged has to hear the confession first. And then moreover, such a confession is more poignant and believable when it's shared with others. And the repentant stands before the one harmed and prepares to take the blame. I would add that naming something has a lot of power to it and a lot of intention around it. Naming something out loud actually gives more power and validity to the wrongdoing. The fourth piece is to reconcile, of Teshuvah, to reconcile. These first three steps address the sinner's needs. So now step 4, reconcile, focuses on the person that was wronged. However commendable regret or confession may be, these alone do not heal someone who has been hurt or deceived. If Teshuvah is to be more than a simple way for the perpetrator, the sinner, to feel good again, if it has become a tool for repairing souls, both the sinners and the victims, then it must transcend the realm of the emotion and conversation and enter this tangible world of actually moving into action. I muted myself. There we go. Okay. So, and it was a good transition. So in the case of reparatory justice, I suspect it will take a long time to begin to make amends. But the disturbing thing for me is that we haven't even begun to set up a process nationally. But California has begun to walk this path, and it is very liberating and inspiring. And you have the power to model the way for the rest of the country. We can't move forward until the thought of wanting to repair begins to also move forward. The fifth part of Teshuvah is making amends. Making amends acknowledges that healing the pain we have caused needs to be achieved through mundane actions. We begin with financial compensation. We offer to pay where appropriate for therapy, spiritual counseling, continued education for the person who has been wronged. Then we may enroll ourselves in therapy or support groups or classes so that we may learn to identify and restrain those impulses. We need to give tzedakah. We need to do that. While a donation of money cannot buy forgiveness, it can help others who were similarly hurt if the tzedakah is given appropriately. I can't stress enough how important this is. We all know that specifically paying for the sins of this country, that there will never, ever in another 400 years be an amount that could actually address the loss. But that's not the goal. The goal is to try. The goal is to repair. The goal is to acknowledge. The healing is in the attempt, the acknowledgement, and acknowledging the harm that was done. The awareness of that action is needed now. And then sixth and final is this idea of resolve. Teshuvah will be complete only if we resolve not to repeat the offense. Having recognized the wrongfulness of our actions, having apologized and reimbursed the injured parties, we resolve to work diligently not to fall into the same behavior when the situation or opportunity arises again. Many argue that enslavement is over, but I see it all around me. It manifests itself differently, but it's there. It's in our criminal justice system. It's in our educational system, our housing and our healthcare systems, etc. We have a lot of work to do. I know I'm getting close to time, so I want to talk a little bit about the stolen beam that Rabbi Jonah Pesner referenced. And the idea of the stolen beam is something from the Mishnah that has been used to actually have conversations and series around what it means to repair, what it means to support reparatory justice for individuals. By Torah law, a robber is obligated to return any stolen item in his possession, provided that its form has not been altered. If one stole a beam and incorporated it into a building, then by Torah law, he would have to destroy the building and return the beam. In order to encourage repentance, the sages were lenient and allowed a robber to return the value of the beam. As Rabbi Pesner mentioned, there's a bit of an argument about this piece. Shammai, one rabbi said, okay, yeah, let's do it. Let's tear down the entire house for this to actually be done properly. And Rabbi Hillel said, maybe not. Let's not do it that way. Maybe it makes more sense to actually return the beam and not destroy the entire house. And so when we think about that, there is a segment that really connects directly to the stolen beam from Isabel Wilkerson's Cast book. And she said something that I think was really understandable for the time frame that we're in. Here's the part that I want to read. The inspector trained his infrared lens onto a misshapen bow in the ceiling, an invisible beam of light searching the layers of lath to test what the eye could not see. This house had been built generations ago, and I had noticed the slightest welt in a corner of plaster in a spare bedroom and had chalked it up to idiosyncrasy. But over time, the weld in the ceiling became a wave that widened and bulged despite the new root. It had been building beyond perception for years. An old house is its own kind of devotional, a dog wager aunt with a story to be coaxed out of her, a mystery, a series of interlocking puzzles. America is an old house. We can never declare the work over. Wind, flood, drought, and human upheavals batter a structure that is already fighting whatever flaws were left unattended in the original foundation. When you live in an old house, you may not want to go into the basement after a storm to see what the rains have wrought. Choose not to look. However, at your own peril, whatever you are wishing away will gnaw at you until you gather the courage to face what you would rather not see. Now, many people rightly say, I had nothing to do with this. I have nothing to do with the sins of the past. My ancestors never attacked indigenous people, never owned slaves, and yes, not one of us was here when this house was built. Our immediate ancestors may have had nothing to do with it, but here we are, the current occupants of a property with stress, cracks, and bowed walls and fissures built into the foundation. We are the heirs to whatever is right or wrong with it. We did not erect the uneven pillars, but they are ours to deal with now. As I close out, I want to share something with you, and that I want you to think about as we move forward. Let me see if I can find it. It's a poem that was written by, wow, I have a lot of notes here. Give me 1 second, I'm finding it. Yeah, lots of notes. Here we go. Okay. This poem was written by Joshua Bennett, called Reparations. And it goes like this: 40 acres and a jewel-encrusted orchid crown for each and every living baby girl, growing up the way we did, the way we do, unbridled, unburied, though we stay pursued by the U.S. school to prison state's laser-like vision. Bi-weekly standing ovations, Brock Hoop resuscitated with a sledgehammer slung over his left shoulder, eyes ablaze, and dead set on the private sector. The price of 4-year tuition, 4-year fascist presidents, any and all forms of predatory opulence, scholarships, scholars that love us enough to break this language lengthwise, filled as it is with the bones of our fallen, monuments to the fallen, a grave site for the illustrious Negro dead. Like Zora Neale Hurston said, illustrious meaning you were Black and full of adoration or vexed, which is just another way of saying you wanted to survive the world, said die and you refused its refusal. Another approach to the general sentiment that Blackness is beautiful, with no regret to their everyday negation of our essential human splendor. An apology on the Senate floor for the trade, the plunder of our names, unremarked graves, a hand in the air, a boot to the throat, guns in the schools, and the guns are the books, the stares of the second-grade teacher calling your son a distraction, your daughter's braids illegal, you're building a blight on the neighborhood, the good you do and dream of never quite good enough to merit the bull's eyes removal. A ship to wherever we point on a map of the measurable universe, dare call harbor sanctum ground, and where the children can play and come home. In closing, it is important for us to understand who we are as Jews, why we are here on this earth, and how we can tap into the holy boldness to make a difference. And in order to do that, as we see the world is on fire all around us, we have to tackle our own pain and trauma while understanding the complexities of our world. As we work together to make the world a better place, it is imperative that we employ restorative justice through reparatory justice, for none of us are free until all of us are free.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. That was spectacular. I learned a lot, was taking notes on my phone while you were speaking. So thank you very much. I want to pause before we and see if there's any questions in the room or in the Zoom rooms for Yolanda on anything she spoke about. I see some thank yous coming in as well. Everyone in the room here was nodding along. Any questions? Nope. All right. Well, with that, then I think. we can-
Sorry, we do have one hand up.
Okay, perfect. I was trying to see.
Monica, you want to go ahead?
No, that was just a clappy emoji.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Yolanda.
Thank you all. I'm going to hang on for a few minutes, so.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Yolanda. I really appreciate it. So we're going to move on a little bit to the reparations work that happened here in California and actually talk a little bit about, if we want to go to the slides, what reparations framework is. That's going to be really important as we get into what we are going to be doing here, what's going on in our legislative work today. I'm going to run quickly through a couple of slides, just so everyone has the same grounding. If you did happen to get one of the handouts that were so wonderfully put together by Hillary and Andrea, there's a little bit of an overview in that as well. But sorry, I accidentally muted myself. Awesome. But we wanted to make sure everyone understood what we meant by reparations. And I think part of what we think of when we think of reparations is always about compensation. And when we think about reparations and what goes into framework, this was put together by the UN in 2005. Compensation is one of the many parts of reparations. And I think this is important as we think about what's going on in California, because yes, compensation, budgets, those are all part of the conversation. But the other parts of what goes into reparations is also important because just like we were talking about teshuvah and the different parts of teshuvah, some of it is the honest looking in the mirror, the restitution, the rehabilitation. How are you thinking about work that is continuing today? And then what comes next? So just going to go through these really quickly. Restitution is where we start, but it's really about how can you restore the victim to the original situation. Not all of these are possible. We can't return people to one's place of residence who might have died 300 years ago. We can think about what does that mean in terms of human rights and identity and being able to live as a full person today. And so when we think about where we begin with reparations, it's really about this idea of restoring the victims to the original status, to who they were before the gross violations occurred. The next piece, which is often what people's brains go to, and I always want to acknowledge that when it comes to reparations, is about compensation. And this comes in a lot of different ways. We're going to talk about sort of ways that has happened in the past. But compensation can be a lot of different things, from actual compensation to thinking about legal expenses, mental harm, moral damages, loss of income, when you think about different wages that people get still to this day within the state of California. And so there's lots of ways that we can think about how we financially compensate the direct descendants of formerly enslaved people in the United States, or how this has happened in the past with other groups that have received reparations. Rehabilitation. This one is so important when we think about what we're talking about in California. It includes things like medical services, psychological services. How do we think about the actual victim and the victim's needs, knowing that different people might have different needs when it comes to reparations? A lot of this we can also think about social, legal, housing, other areas that might not be direct compensation, but really do come down to a person's quality of life and their abilities to succeed within our society. And satisfaction. This is really about how do you think about the public discourse. So have we done a public apology? Have we formally apologized to the people who were enslaved in California, to the direct descendants of those who were enslaved across the United States who live in California or maybe in other countries? How do we think about public memorials, pieces within the public discourse that might not be direct compensation to individuals or other sort of social frameworks, but are we also ensuring that perpetrators are being brought to justice, measures to end violations that might still be happening are happening, and we're having that discussion. And then finally, guarantees of non-repetition, making sure that laws are changed. We're having a whole conversation in other areas about laws that are still on the books from the 1840s in other states. What laws need to be changed so that this cannot happen again? We cannot enslave people within the United States again. How do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? And how do we train our leaders to make sure that we are enforcing this non-repetition effectively? So really important pieces. I went through that quickly. Again, if you want a copy of the handout, they're written in here a little bit more on what was actually in the work that the state put together, but would love to spend maybe 5 minutes. If you want to break out into pair share, we're going to put people into some Zoom rooms, talking about sort of how this might match up with the Teshuva components that Yolanda wonderfully walked us through. And then thinking a little bit about how this becomes real. But I know many folks are familiar with the Holocaust reparations, direct payments from Germany to victims, their families, as well as the then founded state of Israel. And what would have happened if the Holocaust reparations had not been done to the extent that they were, especially when you think about the financial impact that victims and their families were given. So we're going to spend like 5 minutes. If you want to share with people next to you, ask any questions, we can come back together and then we'll turn it over to Chris. All right, we're gonna give another maybe 15, 20 seconds to wrap up your discussions. All right. So I want to give the opportunity for the folks in the Zoom to come back together. Judy, oh, they're back. Perfect. Okay. We've got different slides up. And as folks in the room finish up their lively discussions, Chris and I were having a lively discussion up here as well. There's a little bit more, again, in the pamphlets. We'll make sure we send this out over email. Thank you again, Andrea and Hillary, for putting this together. It's a great, succinct version. Not everyone has read the 1,000+ pages of the state document. But one thing, as I turn this over to Chris, that I think really stood out to those of us who've done the study work, or for the Bend the Arc participants who are about to start on the study work, is that this document had so much in it. And there's so many ways that the reparations framework, that the idea of doing reparations for those who are harmed by our legacy of slavery in the United States can be applied within the state. And I think this is a really important conversation for us to have. Thrilled to let Chris kick this off and share a little bit more on the task force, and then what is going on literally today here in Sacramento on all things reparations, and then we'll talk a little bit more about any call to actions for folks who are interested in getting involved at the end. All right, Chris.
One, two, 1, 2. There we go. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's so good to see everyone. Can I just say, just to start here, how I don't know what the right words are, but fulfilling or edifying, or it fills me up. Whatever the word is, fulfilling me up. It fills me up to be in your presence. For the family watching virtually on Zoom, appreciate you as well. Happy Mother's Day to the mothers once again. As the great poet, laureate, and scholar Tupac Shakur once said, "Dear Mama, you are appreciated." Okay, so we are going to show show our mothers some appreciation today. I'm going to talk to you about what's going on here in California right now and pick up right where we left off. Also, I want to give a big shout out to Yolanda. Thank you so much. That was such a powerful presentation. Helped me understand more about the stolen beam and what are we doing about the stolen beam in this old creaky house, not this building, but the old creaky house that we all live in. So many of you know, but if you don't know, the California Reparations Task Force had 3 jobs to do, 3 tasks, 3 duties it was asked to do over its 2 years of work. So the task force started its work in 2021, worked for 2 years through 2023, and over those 2 years had 3 things by law was asked to do. The first was to study reparations, document the case for reparations, put together the evidence for reparations with a focus on what California is responsible for and why California. And this is the question that we heard most first. Why California? We heard originally there was no slavery in California. We heard originally California was a free state. We heard originally, that California was very different and very much better than the southern states. And so why California? And over the 2 years of the task force's work, we learned, well, California was not a free state. There were enslaved folks here in the state of California. There were close to 2,000 African Americans, Black folks enslaved here in California. Actually, some enslaved right in the same county where we're sitting right now, actually, here in Sacramento County. There's a story not too long ago, maybe the last 3 or 4 years, in the Sacramento Bee that documented evidence of an attempt to sell an enslaved Black girl in 1864 here in Sacramento County. So that's 1864. That is a year after the Emancipation Proclamation. Okay, so that's a year after the cry for freedom went out, and Abraham Lincoln was asked to told the country to free us. There were still attempts to sell enslaved Black folks here in Sacramento County. We were told there was no slavery in California. We know that's not true. California had also one of the first ever, or one of the worst ever, and first fugitive slave laws. And so if you somehow freed yourself, you somehow made your way to California, you were, and happened to be captured or caught, you were captured and then sent right back to where you came from in the same way that you came from there. California did not itself agree to the 14th Amendment or the 15th Amendments to the Constitution that were passed in the 1860s until 1959 and 1962, respectively. So 100 years after California said, yes, we agree with that 14th Amendment, and yes, we agree with that 15th Amendment. And of course, as you may know, California still allows a form of slavery. It still allows a form of involuntary servitude right now in our state prisons. Our state constitution has that same exception clause in it that our national constitution has, that says something like slavery is prohibited, period. Involuntary servitude is prohibited, comma, except as punishment for a crime. And that now allows a form of forced labor to occur right now. That exception was put in the state and national constitutions to allow another form of slavery, or slavery by another name, to continue. So California has a lot to be and a lot to pay for. California was very much responsible for enslavement, but it's not just enslavement, it's the things that came after enslavement also. And that was job one of the State Reparations Task Force's work. It was to document all of the reasons why. And the final report of the task force, which I know many of you are working through and laboring through, and appreciate all of the great work that went into putting together this amazing summary. I believe chapters 4, much of the final report of the state task force. But of course, that's a 1,000-page document. If you don't want to read 1,000 pages, if you want somebody to read it to you and for you, our team is actually reading pieces of the final report every week on YouTube for about an hour a time, each time, on Thursdays at 7 p.m. And it's free, of course. So you can hear this voice read it to you if you'd like to have it read to you. But job number one, study reparations, focus on what California is responsible for. Job number two, educate the public, bring knowledge to the people, as we say. And the task force held over, I believe, 16 public hearings. They work with community organizations like ours, the Coalition for a Just and Equitable California, to do community listening sessions, community information sessions, go out into the community and educate folks about reparations here in California. And finally, the third job of the task force, and what we're really here to talk about right now and today, that third job was to make reparations recommendations. And the task force did that and made over 100 different recommendations, all of which had to, by law, align with or agree with the international framework for reparations that we talked about earlier. So that international framework, that international model, that international example has 5 pieces to it: compensation, restitution, rehabilitation, guarantees of non-repetition, and what we call satisfaction. So sometimes people ask me, what is reparations, Chris? What does that mean? And I usually say, well, reparations, of course, you could say things like means making amends for a wrong done. That's this very simple definition. That works. But now I say something like reparations equals compensation, restitution, rehabilitation, guarantees of non-repetition, satisfaction, and I believe I said restitution also, for the descendants of those whose ancestors were enslaved in these United States. Compensation plus restitution plus rehabilitation plus guarantees of non-repetition plus satisfaction equals reparations. The task force's final report, as mentioned, made over 100 different recommendations, each of which falls somewhere in one of these 5 forms, somewhere in one of these 5 forms. The task force, and I'm going to highlight a few of them here, and then talk about how a few of those are actually in print right now as legislation before. I think almost every bill right now is before one of the appropriations committees, either on the Senate side or the Assembly side, in the legislature right now. There are hearings this week, actually, on every single bill, almost every single bill that's before the legislature. But before I talk about those specific recommendations and highlight a few of them, what I want to talk about also is a couple of the other recommendations that the task force was required to make as part of its work over the 2 years that it worked. And the law that created the task force, in addition to saying that the task force had to make all these recommendations about compensation, all that stuff, the task force was also required by law to make recommendations about who should be eligible for reparations as well. And the task force did that in, I believe, March of 2022, so about a year or so after it first started working. And the task force decided that those who would be eligible for reparations in California had to have 2 things going for them, generally speaking. One, you needed to be a resident of the state of California. Okay, it makes sense. And 2, you needed to be a living direct descendant of someone whose ancestors were enslaved somewhere in the United States. So current California resident and a descendant of someone whose ancestors were enslaved and emancipated somewhere in these United States. And the task force made that recommendation for a number of different reasons. First, the law that created the task force specifically identified descendants of those who were enslaved in the United States as the group to target in the reparations effort. And I know that because myself and our team were part of the teams that were negotiating the language for the original bill that created the task force back in 2019 and in 2020. And that bill was AB, or Assembly Bill 3121. And so that bill said something like, this is a task force to study and develop reparations proposals with special consideration for African Americans who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. So we were actually identified in the language of the bill, and that was the will of the author of the bill, then Assembly Member Dr. Shirley Weber, now of course California Secretary of State Dr. Shirley Weber. Dr. Weber told us when we talked to her about the eligibility question, she told us that she intended this specifically for the descendants, but that there was one other group that she also wanted us to make some consideration for also too. And those were the descendants of what we call, or what we describe as free Blacks. Blacks who were free before emancipation. And this is a particularly interesting group of people because these are individuals who may have freed themselves somehow and were not enslaved when emancipation happened. But those and their descendants would also be eligible for reparations here in California also. So to be eligible for reparations in California, you have to be a California resident and a descendant of someone who was enslaved or free and living in the United States prior to the year 1900. So that's in the law that created the task force. And then, of course, there are some legal and constitutional considerations also about that as well, as many of you probably know. So that was the first big recommendation that the task force made. Then the task force went on to make a bunch of other recommendations, over 100 or so. The ones I'm going to talk about today are really, really important, and we've really prioritized these specific recommendations because to us they have the most chance of actually making and doing what we all want to do, which is to change, not just to repent for the past, but to make a better future. And that's ultimately what this is just as much about as anything else. It's about repairing the past and fixing the past as much as and best as we can, but it's also about making our future better than what our present is today. One of the most important, and in our perspective as an organization, the most important recommendations are the recommendations that have direct financial monetary components to them. And I'll explain to you why that is. All right. And that's the stuff that makes folks the most uncomfortable too. Okay. And I was told if folks aren't being uncomfortable with what you're saying, you're not doing it right. Okay. So we're gonna get a little bit uncomfortable, all right? But that means we're going in the right direction. Okay. So the task force first recommended that there be direct financial compensation to those who are eligible in the form of a guaranteed income program. Okay. So the task force recommended what is in effect a guaranteed income program that would be done over many, many years. Not everyone would be eligible for the same thing or the same amount. But generally speaking, the longer you've lived in California, the more you'd be eligible for. Okay. The thinking behind that is the longer you've lived in California, the more you're exposed to California's stuff, the more harm you've suffered, the more you need to be repaired. So as long as you're eligible, as long as you meet those two eligibility criteria, resident and a descendant, you will be eligible for what is in effect a guaranteed income program, similar to the guaranteed income programs that we have here in Sacramento. We have one. There are, I think, about 100 different guaranteed income programs, right? Stockton, absolutely Stockton. There are probably about 100 different guaranteed income programs that are going on here in California and across the country also, with some very interesting positive results actually coming out from some of the analysis that's been done from some of those guaranteed income programs. I mean, people's lives are really improving. And a lot of the negative stereotypes and stigmas that we hear about what people do with their own money or will do with their own money are being challenged. And so the task force recommended that there be what is in effect a guaranteed income program specifically for descendants, and the task force worked with a team of economists for nationally known, well-respected, some of the best economists that I've ever been around, to be quite honest with you, to come up with the way to calculate the specific losses, and then ultimately what may be the amount that folks need to be compensated with. Those economists estimated, and by the way, this is chapter 17 or 18 of the final report if you're watching, that those economists estimated that across a handful of the areas that they looked at, that the state of California extracted something close to $1 trillion in wealth from the descendant community. So over California's history, the state itself has stolen close to $1 trillion in wealth. And the task force economists said to the task force, this is how much the losses were. And then the task force said to the state and to the legislature when it was done, this is how much the losses were. This is potentially how much the bill is, but potentially. So about $1 trillion in wealth extracted or stolen from this particular community. And so the task force recommended that wealth be returned. Okay? And this is an important piece here. The task force did not recommend that we be given anything. The task force recommended that we have what was taken from us returned. Okay? And that's a very important framing. That's a very, very important framing. The task force did not recommend that we be given or handed anything, but that we be compensated for what was stolen, or that we have what was stolen actually returned to us. So compensation. Also, though, the task force recommended that the state create an agency whose job it would be to implement, to oversee, and to monitor all things related to reparations that happen going forward. Specifically and particularly to have in that agency a place to verify eligibility. So individuals will need a place to go to show that they're eligible, to apply, to get claims and payments processed, et cetera. The task force made that recommendation also, that the state create a new agency, and the task force recommended that that agency be called the California American Freedmen Affairs Agency, CAAFA, the California American Freedmen Affairs Agency. The task force also recommended that individuals who had property taken have that property returned to them. And in the case where that can't happen, that the individual be compensated for the fair market value of that property. Very, very close to that. What do we do about the house built on a stolen beam allegory? Task force also recommended that there be that there be grant programs set up to assist individual descendants to buy homes, that there be property tax relief for descendants, among a number, again, almost 100 or so other recommendations. I'm speaking specifically about these particular recommendations because each of the recommendations that I've highlighted so far, with the exception of one, is now in legislation before either the California State Senate or the California State Assembly. SB, or Senate Bill 1403, is a bill introduced by State Senator Stephen Bradford earlier this year to create the California American Freedmen Affairs Agency. This agency will be responsible for verifying eligibility. It will be a place for folks to go to apply, show that they're eligible, et cetera, et cetera. The bill had hearings in the Senate Judiciary Committee 2 or 3 weeks ago. It passed 8-1. The sole no vote was Senator Roger Niello, if folks are interested in who that is. The bill then went to the Senate Governmental Organization Committee after that, passed 11-0. Now it is before the Senate Appropriations Committee, where it is being heard and will be decided on this Thursday. And so this Thursday, May 16th, is a big day for us, because SB 1403 is going to get heard and decided on in committee, in the Senate Appropriations Committee. That's the final step before the bill goes to the floor of the Senate for the entire Senate to vote on, before we go to the other house, the Assembly, to do that whole process all over again. Senate Bill SB 1403. SB 1331. This is a bill to create what will be called the California Reparations and Reparative Justice Fund. The California Reparations and Reparative Justice Fund. Among the 100 or so recommendations that the task force made was that reparations be funded. There's no way to do this without funding. As Dr. Martin Luther King said, close to near the end of his life, it didn't cost the nation a thing to pass voting rights. It didn't cost the nation a thing to integrate lunch counters. But now we're dealing with problems that cannot be solved without the nation spending billions of dollars. And so to that effect, the task force recommended, and now there is legislation to fund reparations. And this helps answer the question. I know this was a question in the questions that we got online, is where's the money coming from, Chris? How are we going to pay for this, Chris? Part of the answer is SB 1331, the California Reparations and Reparative Justice Fund. This creates a fund by that name in our state treasury, so make some elbow room inside of our state treasury for us. And then requires 6% of our reserve funds to be transferred to it regularly to then fund reparations policies. The California Reparations and Reparative Justice Fund, and that's SB 1331. Also going to be heard this Thursday, or decided on this Thursday before the Senate Appropriations Committee. SB 1013. This is a bill, by the way, every bill that I've named so far are bills introduced by State Senator Stephen Bradford, just if you're curious. SB 1013. This is a bill to provide property tax relief in the form of rebates to individuals who are descendants. Right on, right on. Property tax relief to individuals who are descendants, who own property. The bill is going to be heard this week. And in addition to property tax relief for individuals who own property, the bill was amended now by someone you may be familiar with, State Senator Stephen Glazer, who asked that the bill be amended to include property tax relief for renters also too, which was very, very interesting. And then finally here, SB 1007. This is a bill to create a housing grant program for descendants who want to own homes. So 5 or so of maybe 20 different bills that are right now before the state legislature. Some 1 or more dealing with at least one of those 5 pieces of the reparations framework. So I'm going to stop right there because I do want to get to questions, and I'm going to turn it back to you.
I know we have got just a few minutes left, so I'm actually going to look at the screen. If there's any questions on the Zoom, or Judy, if you want to read any that have come in the chat, because I cannot see them, we can start there.
Nothing so far, so I'd say go ahead to the room and we'll encourage folks on the Zoom to put your questions in the chat. Thank you.
Great. Any questions in the room? All right. Hillary has a question.
With the deficit and everybody having needs, Chris, where do you and your group see the reality on this for reparation?
Thank you for the question. So I think realistically, we're going to get the agency bill done this year. Realistically, we're going to get the fund bill done this year. Those are our top 2 priorities, by the way, at the coalition. Get the agency bill done, pass, sign into law, and get the fund created this year. Those 2 things set us up to do things later, but those things will cost money too. Right? So some really good news though. We got a very favorable analysis from the consultant out of the Senate Appropriations Committee last week, who, their job is to think about the fiscal impacts of your legislation. I almost don't want to say this out loud because I may go home and something changed, but we got a very favorable and I think accurate analysis from the consultant who said that who priced our agency something like between $500,000 to $1 million a year to run, okay, for the foreseeable, so regularly, yearly, okay. Now, to me, that's a lot of money. Probably to everybody in this room, that's a lot of money. But when you have a $300 billion budget, that's not a lot of money at all. Okay. And we don't have the numbers yet for the fund, but the point that I really want to make is that the way that the bills were written and the legislation and the language was written, it's written such that it creates the program structure itself, doesn't ask for any current funding, and sets us up to fight for the funding later. Okay. So it says, let's establish the policy and let's say that we're going to do this. Let's actually commit to it programmatically as a policy first, and then let's fight for the funding next. Okay. So that was, I think, the genius of the drafters of these 2 bills. They separated the funding from the program itself with the budget deficit in mind. So we're going to get the agency bill done this year. We're going to get the fund this year, and later this year we're going to be fighting for money in the next budget and the budget after that and the budget after that. So that's how we've approached it. We've separated the request for funding from the request to set up the programs now. Great question. Thank you.
I have a really basic question that I feel is kind of stupid, but I'm still going to ask. And that is, how are people going to prove that they're the descendants of enslaved people?
Love that question. So part of the answer is the agency. The agency so in the bill right now, if you read SB 1403, it requires to be created inside the agency something called the Office of Genealogy. And the Office of Genealogy will be responsible for working with certified genealogists, genealogical associations, subject matter experts to help individuals show that they're descendants of those who were enslaved in these United States. Now, it's not actually, and so I think, and when I first got into this work, I heard all of the things about it being hard to trace your ancestry back to enslavement. It's actually not that hard. There will be some of us who need more help than others, for sure. So if you went through the foster care system, or if you went through, if you were somehow, if you're unhoused, some of our most vulnerable are going to need more help than others, for sure. But part of the answer is this agency, and for individuals who don't need additional help, it's not hard at all. I could give you actually one name from somebody in my family. I could give you a free website through the census, and you could find my enslaved ancestors within 5 or 10 minutes. It's not hard at all. It will depend on how we design the program. There's a way to design it that's too hard for people to show that they're descendants. For example, give me the name of the plantation and the bill of sale. That's going to be too hard for people. Right? But there are ways to make it much more doable too. Right? If you have an ancestor who was on a census record anytime before the year 1965, to be honest with you, and that person is called Black or African American, it's like a 90+% chance, 99% chance that they are descendants, because before 1965, before the Immigration Acts of the 1960s, our country did not allow Black folks to voluntarily immigrate here. The amount of voluntary Black immigration to the United States before 1965 was like something like less than 1%. So it's like 0 point something percent of the Black folks you ever saw prior to 1965 in this country were descendants. It makes sense, right? The country didn't like people like that, so had a quota saying we don't want people like that coming into the country. So ironically enough, as sad as it is, it actually helps us now, because it's highly likely that if you are on a census prior to 1965, you are a descendant of someone whose ancestors were enslaved in this country.
Okay,
Yes.
from Zoom, Lisa asks, would you please repeat the part about the year 1900 from the recommendations? Why was that year identified?
Yes, thank you. And actually, great question. It actually connects to the question that we just heard, because that was a recommendation from the genealogists who gave witness and expert testimony to the task force. So at the February and March hearings in 2022, the task force asked certified professional genealogists to come to the task force and help them answer the question of, how does somebody show that they're eligible? If we decided for what we call a lineage-based eligibility, would that be doable for people? And all the genealogists said, yes, absolutely, it's definitely doable. Some will need more help than others. But they said, to make it easier, use a cutoff year that will be easier, one, for folks with records, and also for folks showing that they're eligible in other ways. And so the year 1900 was chosen. It was recommended by some of the genealogists. So that's why the year 1900 was chosen.
Chris, thank you so much for the incredible presentation. And it seems like this whole effort is up against the it's too hard, but right? Like okay, so that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. So and it is hard in a year where there is a significant budget deficit. And unfortunately, a couple of years ago, the state was swimming in dollars, and now we're swimming in deficits. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep going, right? I mean, we as a state are giving corporate tax relief. We're giving away lots of money for lots of things. And so I love the approach that you're taking of, here are some concrete things that we can do. So just curious if you can talk a little bit more about kind of your messaging. And you're an incredibly you seem like an incredibly optimistic, person, but you're
I'm-
always up against these questions about, but it's too hard. So just, how do you kind of keep going, and go up against that question?
I appreciate that question. Thank you. I am really, and and let's just talk as real people right now, if we can. Right, let's just talk as real as we like to call ourselves regular Black folks. Right? So when I talk to our team, we call ourselves regular Black folks because we got regular lives. We're all volunteers. We got jobs, kids, school, this, that, the third. All right. So, but thank you for that question. But I know you can relate to this, and I know that people in this room can relate and on Zoom can relate. But look at who we come from, right? And what we come from, and how we come from, and there's nothing that we can't do, and you know that from your own history. Right? There's nothing that you can't do. Some people were sitting in a room 300 years ago where somebody was talking about ending slavery, and they were like, yeah, but it's hard. It's going to be hard. We might have to fight a war over it, Chris. We might have to fight a war. Yeah, it's hard, but we did it. And I want to get back to this deficit piece because I think it's important. So we've said this to our own Black elected officials. We said it to the folks in the governor's office. We said to everyone. We are not accepting the idea that you can only do something for us when you have extra money. Okay, which is what it means when you say you can only do something when you don't have a deficit. That means you can only do something when you have extra money in your pocket. We not the extra money people. We not the you only do something when you got extra chains and I'm gonna take you out and do something. No, that deficit sits on top of $250 billion in current spending now, right? So we will be prioritized just like everything else that is prioritized. And we understand that, the governor released his revision to the budget last week. There's some serious cuts, and some hard to look at cuts going on across the state. And our budget will be balanced, in a few months, right? We by law have to balance our budget, right? By the Constitution. So we're going to find the money in the next few months, no matter what. I want to return to that, but we've said again, yes, this is hard, but you have to do it anyway. You have to do it anyway, and we have to try now. Our people are hurting, and I just keep it real. We got people on the streets right now. We got people who in danger of being on the streets. We got people in prison. We have people hurting in crisis right now. So we have to do as much as we can right now. And again, these two bills, the top two priority bills that I've talked about, 1331 and 1403, we think really set us up to do all the other things later. Keep in mind, the thing that you need to do the compensation part, which by the way, we do think is the most important part, because we think and who mentioned caste earlier? I think it was Yolanda. Please read that book, Caste. We have a different understanding of the system that we're trying to fix here. To us, the system is not a racialized system or a system of racial oppression. It's a system of economic exploitation. It's about the economics. Race is the surface of it. Race is the tool that is used to attack the economics. Okay? And so for us, the most important thing you can do is to go directly to the economics, okay? And directly to the people. That to us is the most powerful blow you could deal to this system, is to pull it out by its roots. And the root is economics. So if you attack the racial stuff, you're going to be less effective.
Thank you so much, Chris. I know we are at 4:02 and folks are going to start heading out. So we'll want to wrap up. I know there's another question or two in the Zoom, and maybe if we have time at the end, we can send some notes out. But I want to quickly ask Marie to actually share Bend the Arc, if what you have going on next, and then we'll wrap it up here from the CBI and hopefully get everyone out in the next 2 minutes or so.
No, I just want to say that I totally support everything that Chris is saying. And I personally am also doing guaranteed income work. And I look at it as stimulus. I think when people say we don't have the money, I think you put money in people's hands and you stimulate California's economy. So I don't look at it as something where the money isn't there. That being said, we'd love to have people come out June 11th to Sacramento. It's going to be a lobby day for all of the bills we're talking about. So that would be great if we could get a Jewish coalition. I think we're going to try to get some Bend the Arc members. And I just want to share a quote about what's on our website, Bend the Arc. And quote is, "We're fighting for the joyful future we deserve, one where Black liberation is realized and where all of us are safe and thriving, no matter what we look like or where we come from. We believe that when in the face of racism, inequality, and the politics of fear, we rise up with courage and act boldly for justice. We connect to our people's purpose and prophetic tradition." So I would like to end by saying everybody's invited if they'd like to join us for Bend the Arc's Final 4 learning sessions. We're meeting, this is one of our Sundays, but we're meeting Sundays from 3 to 4:30 as we wrestle with how best to affect this change. So we would like you to come and help. Obviously, we're going to be supporting as these bills are going through the legislature with sign-on letters, with lobby, visits either on Zoom or however, and making phone calls. So if anyone wants to join with that, that would be really great. So there's plenty to do, and we just encourage everybody to get involved as little or as much as they can. And thank you all for showing up today. It's really great to see everybody here.
Thank you, Marie. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. If you do want to get more involved, please come talk to me, talk to Chris, talk on Zoom. The lobby day, June 11th. I'll say that one more time. If you are local in Sacramento, it is even easier to participate. And if you want to learn more about any of the reparations work with the state or get involved in our Racial Justice Committee, please talk to one of the many members of the committee around the room who I'm sure will be happy to answer questions as well. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. It was really great to see everyone.